Today's gospel passage is kind of all over the map, isn't it? First, Jesus talks about the destruction of the temple. Then he talks about false prophets. Then it's about all sorts of disasters, wars and earthquakes and pandemics and droughts. Then it's about being persecuted for our faith and giving a good defense of our faith under persecution. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, what ties this all together? What cohesive point is Jesus trying to make when he taps into all of these different areas? And I have to admit, as I was preparing for this homily, I was stumped for a long time. I mean, sure, there's an end times vibe to this, but that's not enough. The Gospels always have a point to make, and the end times are scary is not enough. And I must have reread this passage 15 times trying to see through this chaos to find the meaning. And then the last verse of it hit me like a thunderbolt. I think the first many times I read it, I saw it as just part of the last section of the passage. But eventually I read it and I saw it applying to the whole passage. By your perseverance, you will secure your lives. All of the things that Jesus mentions are things that can shake our faith. We've seen it through the pandemic, through the political upheavals, everything that's going on. Many people's faith has been shaken. And Christ is telling us that we need to tap into the strength he offers us and that we need to persevere. When our churches are destroyed, closed down, or sued, we must persevere. When false prophets try to lead us away from the truth, we must persevere. When natural disasters or wars upend our lives, we must persevere. When we are persecuted for our faith, we must persevere. No matter what challenges we face in life, today Christ is telling us we must persevere. To that end, I'd like to speak about one of the things he mentions in the passage, because I have to admit it's been troubling me a bit lately. And additionally, as I was searching so desperately for the meaning here, I spent some time focused on this one point and then realized there was more to be found. The idea of false prophets in our current world. Now, there are two ways people generally use the term false prophets. One is in a very broad sense, that anybody who's teaching something false is in a certain sense a false prophet. And this is a reasonable way to go. But there is also an understanding of it in a much more narrow, directed sense of somebody who is actually, like Christ mentions, acting as if they are speaking for Christ, but aren't speaking for Christ and are a false prophet. And I think we have a lot of them today, even inside our church. There are people who claim to be Catholic, who speak publicly in Catholic forums, and yet they deny the legitimacy of Pope Francis. Now, I want to make sure I'm very clear here. Anybody who knows the history of our church knows that not every pope has been perfect, and sometimes there's been some troubling mistakes made. And so there is definitely room in our church for appropriate criticism of the Pope, particularly when it focuses on any pastoral or discretionary decisions, and particularly if our criticism is done with humility and proper restraint. But that is a very different thing than letting our feelings of angst turn into misunderstanding him as illegitimate. He is our Pope. There is no room in our church to question his legitimacy nor his authority. And I feel it very important to make it abundantly clear, if you are listening to voices who question his legitimacy, you are listening to a false prophet. And we need to stop listening to these people. In too many places, they have been given too prominent of a voice, and we need to shut them off. Even if they have been good voices in the past, they are proving themselves now to no longer be a good voice. And they are particularly troubling because when you have someone who mixes the truth of Christ with heresy, it is so easy to be misled. And that is what is happening with some of these people. And so even if we recognize that when they do that specifically, they are speaking incorrectly, we are still tempted towards their errors. And so I say we need to turn off those voices and not let them be part of our lives. When they denied the authority of the church, that it resides in our bishop and most centrally in the Bishop of Rome, our Pope, they made it clear they lost their way. And this needs to be a clear sign to us that they are false prophets. Today, Christ warns us that there are many ways we can be derailed from following him. We must always be on guard against all of them. And if we are to be faithful followers of Christ, we must recognize these risks and we must persevere in truth.